Tango Tango Papa 2102, January 16, 2022.
Have we seen the actual reality of a monstrous crime? Or merely an illusion, the product of a tortured brain?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Tom Wiles here with you, coming to you this evening from Lincoln, Nebraska. So I am on my way to Ogden, Utah. And so fortunately, I haven't run into any snow. Yesterday, it was snowing in the central part of the country, Missouri and what have you. But I was in, at that point, I was well east of there. I picked the load up in Stuarts Draft, Virginia, the load that I have. And so I was in Virginia and then, West Virginia, Kentucky. So I wasn't anywhere near where the snow was, and then by the time there was snow, I spent the night at north of Evansville, Indiana, so there was snow as near to me as Paducah, Kentucky. I think it was snowing, but the snow was kind of to the south, and it never really intruded to where I was at north of Evansville, Indiana. So it just avoided that. And then whenever I drove across Illinois and Missouri today, you could see where it had snowed yesterday, but the roads were pretty well okay. So there were a few little wet spots here and there. And now that I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, you can tell that it snowed a little bit, but not a whole lot. So, and it looks like I'm on my way to Ogden, Utah, and right now it's looking like there's no snow for the next 2 or 3 days anyway. So maybe I can get in there and get back out. So we'll see. Excuse me. So, in any case, what I wanted to talk about, for some time, I have been talking about things like ideological possession and how people seem to be end up being possessed, and it's based on their values. And of course, these, and I've really kind of talked about this. It's based on kind of religious values, but today I kind of came up with a more direct way of talking about it. And I think what we really have to understand is that we're looking at the world, regardless of how we think we look at it, or we may try to fool ourselves into thinking we're looking at it. We look at the world in a religious way. Meaning, now when I say religious in this case, I mean, we're looking, there's some sort of truth that we think that we're pursuing, and there's some sort of salvation that kind of comes along with the truth. And what we perceive as the truth is really kind of controlled by our values in a very real sense. And so, but the fact of the matter is, you can either, some people look at the world sort of one way, and then you have people on the other side of the divide that are looking at it a different way. Now, let's say that you have someone that they're really, maybe they're religious, maybe they're not, or they may or may not, they may be kind of agnostic and they don't really know if there's a God or not. I think there's a lot of people that fall into that category. And then even the people that say they believe in God, do they really know God? Do they really, and how do you know what you know? If you claim you know, how do you know what you know? So there's that, and then I've talked about believing versus knowing. And, there's a difference between believing and versus knowing. So, but let's say that you have, people say, well, I believe in science. And so there's a lot of people that talk about science and the scientific method and follow the science, and you're a science denier and you believe in myths if you believe in a creator. But they think they're looking at the world. Let's say somebody that's just, they look at science and they have all of their graphs and what have you, and they've got the scientific method, and but the fact of the matter is that they're looking at that religiously. So the point I want to make is as human beings, we're looking at everything from a religious standpoint. Religious meaning we're looking for the truth, and we tend to see what we think is the truth, and it's sort of based on our values, which aren't always obvious even to us. As I've said before, in order to really know what my values are, I have to observe my behavior, and then that can kind of tell me, and because I'm, human beings are hypocrites to varying degrees. So, but but what we perceive of as the truth is based on our values. Now, let's say somebody is claiming that they're looking at the world scientifically, and they really believe they're looking at the world scientifically. It's not, that they're just claiming it. They may really believe that they're looking at the world from a scientific standpoint, and they're following the science. Well, there's a problem. They're still looking at that through a religious lens. They're still looking. We look, the very nature of the way we perceive revolves around the fact that in order for us to perceive, our perception is kind of ordered around finding something that's true. And whatever that truth is, again, it kind of goes back to what our values are. And as I said before, our values are, they can often be hidden from us. So I think, therefore, it's useful to keep that in mind, that we look at everything through a sort of religious lens, or you could say a religious sort of a religious precondition. We're looking for God. In other words, we're looking for truth. We're looking for salvation. Wherever we look, we're looking for it. And we, even though we may think we're looking, we have different value systems, and we're looking for different things, or we're looking for truth in different ways. Maybe you think, well, I'm looking at, the material world, materialism, and the materialism is going to tell me the truth. Whatever that is, you're looking at that. The point I want to make is that you're looking at that through a religious kind of a filter. In other words, you're looking for the truth, which you can recognize as the truth. And the truth always sort of embodies some sort of salvation. And therefore, it's useful. I think it's useful for me to remind myself of that. That everything that I'm looking for, everything that sort of stands out to me, is kind of goes back to my own motive, and my own motive. The very way that human perception works, is we are looking for truth. Therefore, we're looking for salvation. Whatever we look at, we don't even realize it, but we are. And so even, and I don't think you can ever get rid of that bias, but at the very least, it's useful to know that what you're looking for, how you're looking for something. I don't think it's possible for human beings to not look at things through this sort of lens. You can say, kind of looking for the truth, looking for some sort of salvation. It's not possible. And so, if you know that going up front. If you know that, then you can at least, although you can't get rid of the bias one way or the other, at least if you know that, then you can kind of, it helps you to make allowances not only for yourself, but for other people. Kind of in the same way that it's possible once you realize that, your parents were, going back to the idea of resentment, that your parents were faulty, they were flawed. They're sinners too, and so you as a kid, you look at your parents and you think, well, they're not perfect. I was expecting my parents to do this and do that, and they failed me, and they didn't bring me up the way they should have. And we all kind of think that way, because we all kind of come into the world with expectations. So if you can understand that, and understand that they're not perfect, and understand that the people around you aren't perfect as an adult, then you can begin to make allowances and realize that things are going to try to get you, trip you up, get you to resent. So you can begin to, you realize, I've got this tendency to resent, so therefore I'm going to watch for that. And you can actually not resent whenever the whatever it is comes along that you would normally have the resentment reaction. So I think in the same way, you can kind of, if I know up front that I'm looking for the truth, I'm looking for salvation along with the truth, if I know that up front, then I can kind of make allowances for it, particularly when it comes to other people. Because the other people, that's why people are willing to, kind of come to blows and kill each other. And it's because they feel existentially threatened. They really do feel, people really do on, both sides feel existentially threatened if the division ramps up high enough. People really feel that their existence is somehow threatened. And that, you get people to the point where they're willing to, they feel like their existence really is threatened, and they really do believe that, then they're willing to fight then, and fight to the death in many cases. And then, willing to do all kinds of horrific things in the name of, a threatened existence. And in many cases, the existence probably is threatened. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it actually is. So, but in any case, it's, we look at, as human beings, we're looking at the world through religious lenses. We're looking for a religious, kind of a God kind of truth. We're looking for some sort of salvation, to find salvation in that truth. Whether you want to admit that or not, it's better if you realize it. Because if you don't realize it, you can end up in all kinds of hot water, and people do end up in hot water because if they could just have this realization and kind of take that into account, I think it would it would keep you out of a lot of trouble potentially. So, but we are looking, so this culture war that's been going on, raging for years and years, it's really a religious war. We're actually we're having basically religious discussions and not even realizing it. People are talking, they think, well, it's just hot button issues like abortion, or it's, it's big government, or, all of the hot button issues, when in fact, it's really a religious discussion. It really is a religious discussion. And that's dangerous. We should at least be honest and realize that it is religious. And that includes the people that think that there is no God, they're atheists, they're professed atheists. They have to realize that it's, they're still looking at the world through a kind of a religious lens, whether they like it or not. And it's, I dare you to try to get outside of that. I don't think it's possible. Because I think that I believe that the very structure of how human beings perceive the world is kind of aimed at finding truth and finding salvation inside of that truth. So, but anyway, that is actually, it's really worth understanding that. And as I said, I've been kind of talking about this, around this for a long time, but I think this is the most directly that I've ever, been able to kind of come to it. So, let's see here. I had this thought yesterday. You hear people talk about lately, last some period of time, that people have been talking about white privilege. You got white privilege somehow because, you got white privilege, because you're the mainstream, and you're in the mainstream, and you've kind of somehow just your very existence has marginalized these other people, even though these other people may also revere you as they're kind of giving you privilege. But nonetheless, you have white privilege. Well, what's to stop, fat people from getting together and saying, well, people with normal body weight have thin privilege? It's the same principle. Or you could have people that are that claim to be autistic, and they love to talk about neurotypical people, meaning the people that don't have autism, and it's neurotypical this, neurotypical that. Well, what about neurotypical privilege? Or let's say you've got a bunch of alcoholics, that are all kind of getting together, and they're kind of feeling like they're victims or whatever. And what about, so the people that are sober, you have sober privilege. People that live in other parts of the world that aren't American, you could look at us and say, oh, you got American privilege. You were born in America. You got American privilege. Or it could be British privilege. So I think you get the idea that this victim mentality, if they can flip it around for white privilege, then it can and probably will be flipped around for all kinds of absurd things. Anyone that feels like they're being victimized by something is, they can say, well, it's those other people that aren't this way that are making me feel bad. It makes them feel like they're victimized. But of course, there's a weird little thing when they do that, because then they're sort of admitting in their own mind, let's say in the case of white privilege, and it's the black people, and it's the white people that are talking about it more, but let's say there's black people that talk about it. They're sort of admitting that they're kind of putting the white people up on a pedestal. Or the drunks are putting the sober people up on a pedestal, or the fat people are putting the thin people up on the pedestal, etc., etc., etc. Or the autistic people are putting the so-called neurotypical people up on a pedestal. It goes on and on and on. So there is that, that they're sort of embracing a victimhood. They're sort of perpetuating the very thing that they claim is oppressing them. So, let's see here. I'm kind of looking through my notes here. What's this? Okay. Yeah. So I'm just kind of going through these notes that I have, and should have went through it before, and I kind of started the podcast recording before I looked through the notes. And I think in the last podcast I was talking about one of the things, why do human beings exist? And one of the major things about human beings is that we have the ability to perceive. And all of the things that we tend to value revolve around perception. Everything revolves around perception. And we either have control of our own perception, or we don't. We lose control of it. Now, to a certain extent, we're sort of, there's this philosophical idea of thrownness, meaning we're sort of thrown into situations. Each one of us is sort of thrown into, a certain, born in a certain country, in a certain time, with certain parents, and, certain advantages, certain disadvantages, etc., etc., etc. And you can't control that. You're just, there you are. So you're just sort of thrown, kind of apparently completely by chance, you're just sort of thrown into whatever situation you're thrown into. And, so you have no control over that. The only thing you actually do have control over is your own reaction. But, so in a sense, we're thrown into these situations, and so so we have to, to a certain extent, we're going to have to end up perceiving whatever situation we're thrown into. We have to perceive that situation, but at the same time, the one thing we do have, that we can and do have control over, is how we perceive the thing that we're thrown into. And of course, where we go off the rails with our perception is through resentment, through, kind of playing God in our own minds. That's where we go off the rails. Otherwise, we're sort of, thrown into the situation we're thrown into, and then it's up to us to kind of make the best of whatever it is. But really making the best of whatever the situation is always revolves around not resenting. You've got to give up the resentment. And then it doesn't really matter at that point. If you can actually give up resentment, then it doesn't matter at that point what situation you were sort of tossed into. Doesn't matter. Because if it's been my experience, once I was able to really give up resentment, then it doesn't matter what kind of situation that I found myself in. The perception that I had of the world, or my own existence, the comfort, let's say, with my own existence, kind of radically changed. Because the problem is, if you resent, and I think we all do, we come into this world, and that's one thing we all do as human beings, is end up resenting. Usually it starts by, we resent our parents, and then it kind of snowballs, and you resent, the people at school, and the other people around you, and then the people you have to work with, and, you've got all these buried resentments. And the thing about resentment is it comes packaged with its own denial mechanism, and also resentment separates you from who you could have been. It separates you from the identity that was waiting on you for you to interact with, let's say, in the situation you're thrown into. So as human beings, we have, one of our we perceive. That's a primary element that we have, is we're able to perceive our own existence, and so we're able to. There's the kind of the idea in the Bible, wrestling with God. The word Israel means those who wrestle with God, or we who wrestle with God. And so we do wrestle. We're perceiving. You can say perceiving, and we're constantly doing it. If you kind of are self-aware enough, kind of aware of how your own mind works and what kind of goes on in your own mind, you'll realize that you're constantly wrestling with what's right, what's wrong, what should I do, what's meaningful, etc., etc., etc. You're always wrestling with these things, with these ideas. So, but we as human beings, we perceive. It's all about perception, and we are perceiving what human beings perceive. So there's this element that we're perceiving. It's kind of an element of, you could say it's an element, some sort of an element of existence. We're perceiving something, and where we go off the rails is how we do it. Because if we're separated from, whatever our potential, it's like a potential original identity, but it's not, part of our identity is obviously it's based on the situation we're thrown into. Let's say 50% of it is based on the situation in which we find ourselves. Then the other 50% is sort of based on how we react. Okay, and kind of how we're interacting with whatever it is that we're interacting with. That kind of comes along with whatever situation we're thrown into. So where we go off the rails is if we resent, that screws up our ability to perceive, and it screws up our ability to interact with and grow and end up growing out of what could have been an original identity that would be formed not in a kind of a predestination sense, but in a sort of a real-time, moment-by-moment way, would be formed, because you're sort of thrown into a situation, and then sort of emerge from that situation with perception, and in the absence of resentment, then you've got this other element that you can call it intuition or whatever else, but it's there to kind of make an identity. Sort of in the same way, you plant, the seed from the flower, goes into the ground, and then the sun shines on the seed. Well, the flower, the plant that has the flower on it, sort of has sort of seeking the sun. It responds to the sun, S-U-N, sun, responds to the sun, and it's kind of got some of the sun's nature in it. It's not the sun. The sun is the sun, but the flower sort of and the plant and the flower sort of, in trees or whatever else, sort of respond to the sun. And they have some of the sun's nature, therefore. And they're shaped by the sun's nature. So, you can think of using that as a sort of a metaphor. You could say that, or an allegory, you could say that resentment sort of would, in the plant terms, resentment would sort of shade the plant from the sun. It would prevent the plant from being able to interact properly with the sun. It would not necessarily shade it, but it would, you could think of it that way, or it would prevent it, even though the sun was shining on it, it would prevent the plant, if the plant could resent the way human beings resent, it would prevent the plant from developing properly in response to the moment-by-moment exposure to the sun. So, therefore, it's useful to get rid of resentment. And I know a lot of people think it's, they kind of like to wallow in it, and they love it when other people kind of share the misery with them. There's this old saying, misery loves company, and I do believe that's true. Misery does love company, and but who wants to be miserable? Who wants to go through their existence being miserable and then trying to distract themselves from being miserable? And God, look at how many distractions there are. God only knows how many distractions. Anything can become a distraction. Literally anything. And the sad part is people, well, there's a line in the Bible that talks, people, that people perish for lack of knowledge. And this is really, knowledge is worth having. Get rid of your resentment. Understand that resentment isn't your friend. Resentment is how you lose who it is how you lose who you could have been. It's how it prevents you from developing into the person that you could have been. And again, it doesn't really matter what, where the seed fell. The seed, it doesn't matter what situation you were thrown into. It doesn't really matter. What matters is whether you're able to actually mature and get rid of the resentment or not. So, anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a close and see if I can't get it uploaded. It's still, what time is it? 7:02 p.m. So, probably won't go to bed just yet. But I will probably leave here maybe by about 6 a.m. or so. Try to get out of here and get headed west somewhere. I still have, what does that say, 874 miles. I'm looking at the mileage on the GPS, so not too bad. Should get there sometime on Tuesday, probably in the afternoon, maybe, I don't know. We'll find out. So anyhow, hope everyone is having a great weekend, and I will catch you later. Remember, Trucker Tom is like Visa. He's everywhere you want to be.
Product reviews, restaurant reviews, photos, opinions, and more. Visit Trucker Tom's website at www.truckerphoto.com. You've been listening to Trucker Tom's podcast, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. All you have to do is send us an email to tom@truckerphoto.com.